Nawn ni gychwyn, felly.
Okay, we'll
Diolch
make
yn
a
fawr iawn i
start
chi
then,
gyd am
and thank you
ymuno efo
all
ni
for
heddiw.
joining us this
Nia Bowden
afternoon.
ydw i,
My
dwi'n
name is
aelod
Nia
Cymraeg y
Bowden.
Busnes
I'm
Cyngor
a,
Gwynedd.
a business support
A pwrpas
manager in
heddiw i
Cyngor
fod
Gwynedd,
wedi i
and
ni
the purpose
edrych
of
ar
today's session
rheoliadau
is for us
sydd
to
wedi
look at
bod
some of the
trwy'r
changes
cyllideb
that have
diweddar.
come through the
Yn penodol y
recent
newidiadau
budget,
sydd wedi bod
specifically the
cyfraniadau
changes
llwyddiant gwladol i
to
gyflogwyr. A
uh,
rydyn ni hefyd yn edrych ar
employers'
y cynefin
NI
safswm
contributions, and we'll
cyflogadwyddol
also be
hefyd.
looking at the increase in the
Mi fydd
minimum
Rebecca
wage
Rice-Roberts
nationally.
a Sean
Rebecca
Jones o cwmni
Rice-Roberts
Griffith
and
Williams
Sean
Echo yn
Jones from
arwain
Griffith
trwy'r
Williams and Co
sgwrs.
will be taking us through
A'r
this
ffordd o'n i'n am wneud hyn
session,
ydy
and
bod nhw yn mynd i
the way
roed
we'll
y
do this
canlyniad fel yr
is that they
gwybodaeth
will
dwi'n
give
wneud.
their
Ond os gennych chi
presentation, but
gwestiwn
if
ar
you
unrhyw
do
bwynt,
have any
eto, os ydych
questions
chi'n
on any
mynd i gwaelod
points,
y sgrin, ydych
again,
chi'n
if I can
gweld
take you to the bottom of your
icon
screen,
Q&A.
you will see a
Ac os
Q&A
ydych chi efo
icon,
cwestiwn i ofyn,
and if
rhowch
you
o i
do
fewn
have
yn y
questions to
Q&A
ask,
a
then
nawn ni fynd trwy'r
note it
cwestiynau i
in the
gyd ar
Q&A,
ddiwedd
and
festyn.
we'll go through the
Felly,
questions at the
fel
end
ydyn
one
ni'n
by
feddwl
one.
rhedeg y sesiwn bore
So
yma,
that's
pnawn 'ma,
how
pnawn
we'll
cyhoeddus, bore bore.
run the session this
Felly,
afternoon.
nawn ni gychwyn yn syth.
So we'll
Os
make
ga
a
i ofyn i
start
chi,
straight away,
Rebecca,
and if I could ask
i
you,
ddechrau,
Rebecca,
os gwelwch yn dda.
to begin.
Diolch yn fawr Nia ac i'r cyngor am
Thank you
ofyn i
very
fi
much,
ateb
Nia,
hynny.
and to the Council
Jyst
for
roi chydig
asking
bach o
us to do
deithio
this
pwy
today.
ydan
So
ni.
just to give you some
Da ni
background
yn
as to who
ffyrm
we
oil
are,
producer trefi yn
we
base yn
are a
Pwllheli
firm of
ac
chartered
mae 5
accountants
partner a
based
mae
in
'na 20
Pwllheli.
staff
There are
gen i
5
2 yn y tîm
partners and
payroll
20
a fi 'di
staff,
bod yn
including
Siôn
2 in the
efo'r colleague
payroll
yma a bod
team,
i'r
and I've brought
cyfarfod
Sean
adran payroll
with
a
me
fi ddol
today, as
trafod y
he's the
cwestiynau ar
manager
y
of the
diwedd.
payroll department, and he'll be able to
So
answer
yn
questions at
amlwg
the
mae'r
end.
gyllideb 'di newid
Obviously, the
llwyth o
budget
ar
has
draws bob
changed a
math o
lot of
wahanol
things
diffyg,
across
ond
all
heddiw 'ma,
sorts of
'dan ni
different
jyst yn mynd i sôn am
topics.
beth
But
sy'n newid
today,
i
we're
cyflogwyr.
just going to talk
Yym,
about what has
so dwi
changed for
mae'n un o'r
employers.
pethau 'na, does 'na'm gormod i ddeud mwy
It's
o,
one of
achos
those
dan ni jyst
things
yn mynd i
where
drwy'r
there's
pethau.
too much to
Wel,
say,
y peth
but we
cyntaf
will
sy
go
isie
through
wneud ydy
everything. Now,
symud
the
y sleid.
first thing I need to do
Bantad.
is move the slide
Na
forward.
fo. So, ar y
There
tabl
we
yma,
are. So in this table, sorry, I've
ar y
just gone
tabl
one
yma,
too
fe
far.
welwch chi
On
bod
this
yr
table,
isafswm
you'll see
cyfalodadol
that
hefyd wedi
the
codi.
national
So,
minimum
cyn
wage
sôn
has
am
also
cynnydd
increased.
yn y swyddog gwadol,
So
rhaid chi gofio
before talking
bod yr
about the
isafswm
increase in
cyflogwr wedi bod
NI,
am
you
amser
have to
hwyrach
remember that the
dangos
national minimum wage has gone up as well. And this table
sydd wedi
shows
newid
all
ffenestri
the
o dan
differences,
21,
including
welwch
for
chi
those
hefyd
under
yr percentage
21.
sydd wedi newid,
And you'll
a
also
mae
see the
wedi gallu bod
percentage
y rhai ifanc yn cael mwy
change, and it
o
looks
bwyddiad nag y rhai
as
hŷn yn
though
dilyn.
young people are getting a
Felly,
higher
i
increase
ddim o
than the older
percentage
ones.
blwyddyn
And so
nesaf,
this is coming into force from the
codi er
1st of
cyflogwr
April
rhai
next
ifanc
year. And
yn
if
ffigwr
you
sydd wedi golygu
are
blwyddyn
employing
felly.
young people,
Pidwch yn
especially over the
bleidorus
summer,
bod
please
hwnna'n
be cautious
newid
and make
ac
sure
yn
that
mynd i
this,
achosi
this is
mwy
changing
o
and
bwysllechi blwyddyn
will
nesaf
c
a
cause
hefyd
more
wedyn
costs
y
for
cyngor
you
dod o
next
hynna
year.
hefyd.
And then, of course,
So,
the
os oes
national
cwestiwn
insurance on
hoffwn,
top
plis
of it.
rhowch nhw fewn a
So
mi
if you do
atab
have any
ar y
questions on
diwedd.
this, put them in and
Okay,
we'll answer
ymlaen
them
i'r
at the
sleid
end.
nesa. So,
On
mae
to the
pethau
next
y
slide.
sefyllfa i gyflogwyr wedi newid.
National
Fel sy'n
insurance
pwyntio allan,
for
does 'na newid
employers
wedi
has
bod
changed, and
i'r
I should
swyddog
point out
gwadol
that there hasn't been a change
fwynhau. So, un
in
cwestiwn sydd wedi
the
newid
NI
i'r
for
gwesty
employees.
arnyn ni fel
It all
cyflogwyr.
falls on us as
So, pedwar peth
employers.
sydd wedi newid i
So
gyd.
4 things have
Mae'r
changed in
cynghoriad
total.
allanol
The
'di cynyddu
percentage
o
contribution has increased
13%
from
i 5%.
13.8% to
Mae'r trosau
15%.
eilaidd wedi dod i
The
lawr
secondary
o
threshold has been
9,100
reduced from
i 5,000. Rwan, y
9,100 to
trothwy eilaidd ydy'r
5,000.
pryd
Now,
mae'r
the secondary
cyflogwr wedi
threshold
talu
is
yr
when
yswiriant
the
gwadol.
employer starts paying
Mae'r
NI
lwfans cyflogaeth
contributions.
wedyn wedi
The
newid
employment
o
allowance has
5,000 i
increased,
10,000
doubled
ohona.
from 5,000
A
to
mae'r rheol hefyd wedi
10,500.
yswiriant gwadol
And
wrth gwrs
the
ddim wedi
class
cyfarfod.
1
Mae hynny
national
wedi
insurance
lot o
contribution
werth.
liability
Dwi'n mynd i geisio
no longer
ymddangos fy
applies.
hun
So if
yn
your
10,000 neu drysodd
NI,
blwyddyn
class
cynt,
1 NI
fysach chi ddim yn
contributions
cael hawlio
were
dilyn yr esblygiad
100,000 or
ganlynol
over
hynny wedyn.
the year previously, you wouldn't be able to claim the
So,
allowance the year after.
ia, mae 'na newidiadau gwbl. Mae'r
So yes, there
cyfraddau'n
have been
codi, mae'r
changes. The
trosau
percentage
eilaidd
has gone up,
wedi dod
the
i lawr,
secondary
ond mae'r
threshold has
lwfans
been
cyflogaeth
reduced, but
wedi
the
codi
employment
yn
allowance
fwyaf.
has increased. So they're the main
So,
changes.
jyst i roed esiampl, os
Uh,
ydych chi'n
now, just to
cyflogi
give you an
rhywun
example,
ar
if you
gyflog
employ
blynyddol o
somebody on an annual
46,000,
salary of
dyma yw'r ffigurau.
26,000,
So,
these
fel
are the
gwelwch chi, mae'r
figures.
ffigurau
So, as you see, the
2024-25
figures for
yn golygu fysa
24-25
cyfraniad
mean that
ysbrydol
the
eleni yn
NI
£2,000
contribution this year would be 2,300. Well, without a salary increase even next year, just because of these changes, you'll see that that has increased to 3,150. I hope you can see the table properly, because some of it is hidden on my screen, but it's increased by about £800 in total from one year to the next. In this example, it doesn't make a difference anyway because the employment allowance has doubled. But if you have 3 people, say, on a salary like this, then the employer's NI contributions this year would have been around 6,900, and because of the employment allowance, you would have had to pay 1,900 of it over to HMRC. But although that contribution has increased to 3,000 for every employee, the bill comes up to 9,450, I think. But because the employment allowance has now doubled, you actually don't have to pay any of it over because that 9,000 is under 10,500. So in this case, you'll be slightly better off. So it depends entirely on how many you employ and on what scale. And I should note that all these things come into force from the 6th of April 2025 as well. I'm going to hand over to Sean now because he's created these graphs and he can explain better than me what has changed. And there'll be more information after this, which gives you more of a visual as to what has changed. Yes, with 2 employees, nothing changes at all, more or less, because the employment allowance has gone up and that outweighs any increase in NI contributions. With around 5 employees, it depends how much they are paid, but this is based on the minimum wage. It could work out. We've worked it out on full-time, 40 hours a week. So the costs could be slightly lower because of that increase to 10,500 in the employment allowance. But once you go over that threshold, the costs do then start to increase fairly rapidly, as this shows around 10 employees. All these employees are the same here, but there's a 5,000 increase in costs there just with the national insurance contributions of the employer. So it does show the more employees you have, the higher the costs will be. But again, with small businesses, you may be fortunate and you may be slightly better off next year, even after the minimum wage increases and also what's happened with national insurance contributions. Now, this graph has been based on 3 employees, and it looks as if there's a huge jump. But if you look at the figures on the left-hand side of the graph, the actual jump in costs in a year is not much. It's, say, £100 a month. With the salary increase, with the increase in minimum wage, and that's over a whole year, the increase would be £110 per month for the employer as to how much they have to pay out. So it isn't that much of a difference. As I said, the graph looks as if there's a huge jump, but if you look at the figures on the side, it gives you a better idea, and there isn't much of a change really. So moving on, and now this shows the changes with national insurance contributions for the employer. This shows things better. It's based on 5 employees and then 4 working full-time and 1 director, company director. Now you see here from around month 5 or month 6, that the costs that you would have had this year start to kick in after they use 5,000 of the employment allowance every month, and the jump afterwards is quite high. But next year, as the allowance is much higher, it won't kick in, we don't think, until around month 9, which is around Christmas, when maybe you don't want higher costs, but then it's a significant jump, and it will go up much more than it is this year. And that is going to work out, we think, over a year. After everything's been taken into account, that will be around £2,000 extra for the employer than it would have been this year. It's about £170 a month, the costs, extra costs, and this again has been worked out on the employee being paid a similar wage to this year. It's just the costs, the minimum wage, which has increased everything. And if we go on to the next slide, this shows what happens with 10 employees. For example, we've costed out as 7 full-time, 2 apprentices and 1 director. The apprentices won't have a huge impact, but just the minimum wage increase because we put them under 21 years old. So there wouldn't be an NI contribution from the employer on this. But again, with more employees, it shows the impact of the employment allowance running out sooner, if you like, within the year. This year, that would have been used in just a month or 2, and by the end of month 4, it's gone. And so they're the costs on the green line. On the red line, as it's doubled by next year, it does last a bit longer, the employment allowance, but the jump happens much more quickly. It happens from 1 month to the next. There isn't a gradual build up to it. And again, the costs then from month to month to the employer is around £2,000 according to this. And I think it would be around £19,000 for the extra for the employer. We don't want graphs going up from 20 to 30 employees. Everything would have looked much worse if we went up in terms of the number of employees. So we've stopped there. But again, in terms of where we are in Gwynedd, we have a lot of small seasonal businesses, and this graph has been worked out, on a business such as a cafe. If you had 5 employees, only 2 full-time, 1 working part-time, and 2 seasonal, maybe students or school children, or somebody who's 16 or 17 years old, working during summer holidays or half-term and maybe a few weekends. And that's how we've worked this out. And the graph shows starting from about Easter, starting to go up for half-term, Whitsun half-term, then the summer holidays. That's the plateau in the middle. Goes down then after the summer, and then increases again with half-term, end of October, and then a spike again over Christmas, and then goes down again. We had thought of leaving it at just 2 lines there, but we do have the cost to the employer in green and the cost to the employer in red for the next 2 years, and the gross pay for the years for everybody, and that shows the increase in the minimum wage. So they do track fairly close to each other, with the costs showing that they would be the biggest costs for the employer. This type of employer would be the increase in minimum wage. the two lines at the bottom, blue and yellow, they show the employment allowance being used, and that wouldn't run out by the end of the year here. There'd be plenty of room there to cover any increase in national insurance for the employer, and those two lines run alongside each other throughout the year, despite the increase in how much national insurance you would pay. But I think that gives you a better idea of how it would affect that type of small business that we have in this area. Yes, so seasonal businesses, more or less. And I think that covers all the graphs. Thank you, Sean. So going on then with the employment allowance, there are a few rules that you need to be aware of. So you can claim if you're a business or a charity. Also, people who employ a care or support worker can claim it. The reason I point this out is that this is a fairly recent change, only a few years ago, that people couldn't claim it. So if you're one of these, then you need to double check. Also, another thing I need to point out is if you're a group of connected companies, only one within the group can claim it. So if you have 3 different companies, for example, then it's only one of the 3 that can claim it. You cannot claim it if the businesses have gone the de minimis state aid limit. I can't go through these rules in too much detail because they are quite sector specific. So the de minimis will change depending on what sort of business you are. For example, the example I've given is the de minimis limit for farmers is lower than, say, a factory. So it's something that the business itself will have to double check as to which threshold applies to them. If you're a public body, you can't claim this allowance. So a county council or NHS, Betsy Cadwaladr, for example, wouldn't be able to claim it. And the final one there, and maybe this is the one which is the biggest example for us, the companies with only one company director on the payroll, so the sole company directors. So yes, they're the people who can and cannot claim it. So moving on to the next slide, we asked if there were any tips or tricks. Well, unfortunately, there aren't many tips or tricks that we can give you because these rules, they are what they are, really. But in terms of the employment allowance, just 1 or 2 things to think about. Check if you are claiming it, especially if you do your own payroll, because we find that maybe some clients haven't been claiming it. So if you haven't claimed it yet this year, make sure you claim it before the 5th of April next year. Also, check if you've been claiming it over the past 4 years. Some of our clients have been caught out where now you have to make the claim for it annually, whereas previously it would roll over in the software automatically. But I've had one client, and I'm aware of 1 or 2 other clients who've done it themselves and haven't ticked the box every year. And you can go back 4 years to backdate it. So you can still claim it and backdate it, but double check if you have. If you haven't, then claim for a backdated. And a few other tips and tricks. Well, the only thing we could think of is that you can do a salary sacrifice scheme. It is discussed in the press quite a lot at the moment, and what it means is that you reduce the staff salary, but rather than the salary, they get a benefit in its place, which means they don't pay national insurance on it. So an example I have is, rather than give a salary increase to somebody next year, maybe you could give them more pension. So you as an employer would be paying into their pension pot. That pension then doesn't attract national insurance because there isn't an NI on the pension. The staff will still end up with more in their pockets because the pension, the salary reduces and the employees' NI reduces as well. So it's one way maybe that will help to take the bill down for everybody. We could provide more advice on that, but what you need to double check, or what you need to be careful of, is that it is a contractual change, so you have to do it after a discussion and agreement with the staff. It isn't something that you can just decide to do without changing people's contracts. So I would advise you maybe to seek HR advice if you're thinking of doing anything like that. One other thing as well, if you're going to do a salary sacrifice scheme, then it won't reduce the gross pay to less than the minimum wage. So it's not likely to help those small businesses employing people on lower salaries, I'm afraid. So it's more towards the larger businesses with higher salaries, to be honest. Pension is one thing I mentioned. There are a few other things you could do. You could offer more annual leave. If you give 4 weeks, maybe you could increase that, and bank holidays. Sort of little things like that you could look at. But yes, do get in touch if you want help with that. And to be honest, unless Sean has anything to add, that's more or less it. That's all we have to discuss, and we'll go on to questions. I don't know if there are any. I haven't kept an eye on the chat box.
Mi o 'na, ond nathoch chi atab o, o'dd fynd.
Well, there was a question, but I think you answered it later on in the presentation. But just for everybody else's benefit, the question was to confirm for salaries for people under 21 that you don't have to pay NI. No, not an NI employer contribution, no. There we are, that was the question. Am I right to think that there was a question that came through before the event? Yes, there was a question as to what the minimum wage rate is, but it is in the table, so I think we've covered that as well. But obviously, if there are any other questions that crop up after today's sessions, you're welcome to get in touch. And I assume that the slides will be shared with people as well, so you're very welcome to get in touch afterwards. There we are. Thank you very much. Thank you both, Rebecca and Sean. As you mentioned, it is fairly straightforward in the fact that it's, you just have to comply with it. But I do think it's worth going through it and making sure that people understand it. And there were quite interesting things at the end in terms of the salary sacrifice schemes and, looking at it from a different perspective. So thank you very much for raising that. And with that, as I said, we'll make sure that everybody who's joined today will receive a copy of the slides, and you're welcome to get in touch if there are any further questions. Whilst I'm here, I'd like to take the opportunity to say that we are here to help businesses in Gwynedd, and that was the point of organising today's session. So if you feel that a session on another topic would be useful to you, then do let us know about the type of thing that we could bring together fairly quickly to try and help. So do get in touch if you have any ideas around other things that we, as the Council's business support team, can do to help you. And that's it, I think. So thank you very much to you all. I'm just checking in case there are any further questions. No? So thank you all for joining us and enjoy the weekend. Thank you.